Okay. Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well, and thank you for joining us today for our online practical CV workshop. My name is Abby Wager and I'm a client partner here at Signature Recruitment. Here with me is Helena Pinto, who will be running through the workshop today. If you are familiar with any of our online events, then you'll know we regularly provide CV tips and advice to our candidates. However, coming into 2021, we have had a lot of requests from candidates, for example, CVs or guidance on content tailoring. Rather than tips, this workshop will be a practical run through of a CV document, the sections it should entail and the contents of each section. So you may want to have your CV to hand to work through as we go. And if you would rather listen and work on your CV later on, then you will receive a full recording of this webinar after we finish. We hope that this workshop will provide you with a CV template that can be easily tailored towards any role that you're applying for. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Helena, who started as a candidate resourcer at Signature Recruitment. Before being promoted to a client services executive, she works with candidate CVs on a daily basis, receiving feedback from both candidates and hiring managers. So both sides of the coin, really. So this experience makes her perfectly placed to guide us through this webinar today. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please do add any questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now over to you, Helena.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, everyone. As Abby mentioned, today we are going to run through a CV document in a set format. This is an overview of the document as a whole. We'll start off initially with the profile and key skills sections. These are the two most important sections on your CV document, which is why they're at the top of the document, followed by your experience and your education, two sections which are quite evidently apparent on every CV. So let's dive right into each section, starting with our profile section. So we always start our CVs off with a profile section, and what this section includes is a brief summary of yourself, the objectives of your job search, and why you're applying for this specific role. The reason we have this profile section is that the roles that we work on specifically at Signature and just in the job market today don't even accept a cover letter, really. We've kind of moved away from that in recruitment a little bit. So if you take that document away, you are losing valuable information on your reasons for applying for the role and a little bit about your previous experience. Just to give you an idea of length, the profile section is usually about 3 to 5 sentences. It doesn't need to be any longer than that, but it can if there are key things that you want to include. Your profile is the first thing that the client reads, and it does set the tone for the rest of your CV. So it's important to put a bit of effort into it and to make sure that it is really strong. Before I give you the first example, I'm going to run throughout the whole workshop the example of a recruitment consultant who is applying for a managerial role in recruitment. I'll also run through how to tailor your CV specifically if you aren't applying for a role within recruitment, but let's say you're applying for a managerial role in a different sector or something not related to recruitment. So the first example is a professional and competent recruitment consultant with 10 years experience working in the higher education sector. With excellent communication skills, I have the ability to build and maintain long-lasting stakeholder relationships. I pride myself on meeting deadlines, often working accurately under pressure. For my next career step, I'd like to manage an ambitious team and contribute towards overall company objectives. I hope that you can see from this example that it includes a brief summary of the individual and their skill set. what the objectives of their job search are, and why they are interested in a managerial role. Now, if you were to look at this profile and you wanted to tailor it for a managerial role, not specifically in recruitment and maybe in retail, for example, it's important to remember that they are still a recruitment consultant, so their experience doesn't change. So obviously a managerial role in retail might be quite different. So it would be important to consider the key skills that are mentioned, the sector that's mentioned, and the objectives that are mentioned. So we might want to change the first sentence, which says 10 years experience working in the higher education sector. And we might want to change this to 10 years experience working in a fast-paced environment, because like recruitment, retail is also a really fast-paced environment. Then we would have a look at the skills, and I might change the part about stakeholder relationships, maybe to something customer services related that would lend itself more to a retail environment. Lastly, I might decide to keep my objective the same, or I might say that my objective is to change sectors for X, Y, and Z reason. Yeah, it's just important to tailor it specifically to the role that you're applying for. Now that we have our profile down, let's move on to the next section. The second section is the key skills section. And this section is basically a shopping list of all the skills that a client's looking for in that role. I personally work with clients on a day-to-day basis, and when they hand a job over, they usually give us a list of requirements that they're looking for on a candidate CV or in terms of experience. And if they see that list on the CV, even before they read through the whole document, it is likely that you'd be moving forward in the process. So what this skills section includes is a combination of hard skills, such as qualifications or systems that you've used from a previous role. For example, minute taking in meetings, or some soft skills as well, which are more like personality traits. So these are things like being organized and timekeeping and other skills, similar skills to that. As a general rule, we like to stick to about at least 3 hard and 3 soft skills that are specifically applicable to the role that you're applying for. So, for example, the recruitment consultant applying for a managerial role might have the following skills: people management, sickness, lateness and review process, stakeholder engagement skills, Microsoft Office and CRM knowledge, working well under pressure to deadline, attention to detail, for example, processing weekly payroll and producing reports on a weekly and monthly basis. If they were now to be going forward for a role in retail, it's important to tailor those skills specifically to that role from reading the job specifications. So instead of saying you have attention to detail for processing weekly payroll, you might say you have attention to detail for analyzing sales figures. So we don't want to have to change everything. We just want to make it relevant to the role that you're actually applying for. The profile and key skills sections are probably the most important sections that you'll want to tailor, because they are the first thing that the client reads, and your employment history and education won't necessarily change very much, because the companies that you work for and your qualifications or what you've studied won't really change that much. So our third section is your experience. So this could be employment history, work experience, so you can title it however you'd like to. And this section does exactly what it says. It's going to explain your experience. So this is just a timeline of your work experience, and it should be clear what you were doing in gaps between job roles. So if you were traveling, it's important to include that on your CV as well. Each job role should include the company name, your job title, and the correct dates of when you worked there. as well as bullet points of what you did on a day-to-day basis. The reason why we use bullet points is because it's easier to read and it is more to the point, and also for tailoring. So when tailoring your CV for a specific role, if you have an entire paragraph, it does make it difficult to have to rewrite the whole paragraph, as opposed to having to, just amend some of the bullet points. If it's in bullet points, it's easier just to tweak a bullet point, move it up to the top of the list if it's more relevant, and reorder it rather than having to write the whole section. Bullet points that most describe the role that you're applying for should be at the top of the list. It does help to elaborate where possible. So, for example, if one of the points that you mentioned was data entry, you might want to say carrying out data entry on client records with a high attention to detail. So just kind of explain what you were doing with within that specific role. So the example for this recruitment consultant is just below. As you can see, they've included their company they worked for, their job title, and the dates. Even if a candidate was going forward for a role in retail, it's important, like I said, their experience doesn't change, but to tailor it more specifically. So anything that would be people or service related might be the top couple of bullet points. Make sure that you do include all of your roles. It's important not to make a decision on what roles you think are relevant or not. It is a myth on how long your CV should be. The final section is your education. So similarly to experience, where you've been educated or your studies and your qualifications you have achieved will always be the same. However, if there are some transferable skills that you've gained within various courses or qualifications, it is important to highlight them. Make sure to include all of your dates and your grades. You've worked really, really hard for these qualifications, so it's important not to sell yourself short. Also include any achievements or merits if you're part of any sort of like committees or societies within university. It's important to include those as well. It is a general rule that the more experienced you get, the less prevalent your education achievements will be, but it's always a fact that you have achieved those qualifications and they will always remain the same. So like I said, it's important not to sell yourself short. So I've just included a short example, as you can see. Perfect. So that will take us from top to the bottom through a CV document. If you do want to include any other elements, definitely do if it is relevant. So for example, people going forward for publishing roles might want to include their interest in books. One thing I would recommend is not to have a references section. You'll always be given the opportunity throughout the recruitment process to provide those details and those documents, so it doesn't need to take up space on your CV document. Amazing. So to summarize, you are going to have your experience and education, which will largely remain the same and can be formatted in a way that's more relevant to the role that you're applying for. But the majority of your CV tailoring is going to go into your profile and key skills sections. Before you attempt to work on tailoring your CV towards a specific role, it is important to check out this person specification on the job description, because it'll always have all of the information that you need, or the key sort of skills or traits that the client is looking for, and those will obviously be the most relevant skills that you want to take into account. I am quite mindful of time. I know we said we would be about 10-15 minutes, so I think we'll wrap it up there.
Thank you, Helena. That was very informative. So I hope you all thought so too. But we have had a few great questions sent in kind of before the webinar. So we're just going to kind of answer a couple of them for you, if that's all right. Fab, because I think you covered so many great topics then. But the first one was, I was made redundant in the pandemic, and I've been completing some voluntary work. Could I put this on my CV?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. Obviously, I think a lot of people have experienced the same kind of thing over the past year, but it's really important to show hiring managers what you've been doing throughout that time and how you've used the time that you've had to your advantage. So even though it's volunteering, there's definitely skills or certain things that you would have been doing within that role that could lend itself to your next role. So it is important to kind of highlight, like I mentioned earlier, any gaps, and obviously this would demonstrate what you were doing during that time period. So including what you were doing on a daily basis, where you were volunteering, and kind of how it would lend itself. So almost highlighting what you've done in your volunteering that would lend itself to the role that you're applying for.
Great, perfect. And just one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So would employers want to know about the courses I've completed whilst out of work as well? Because I know a lot of people were doing all those courses during the pandemic.
Yeah, amazing. So again, it's definitely important, I think, to include, again, relevant things to, on your CV to the role that you're applying for. So, for example, if you're doing a cooking course, but you're applying for an accounting job, that might not be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing maybe a sort of bookkeeping course, or if you working in marketing or that kind of thing, and you've been upskilling yourself in that area, it's important to highlight those relevant sort of that relevant experience, really, or what you've learned that would be able to lend itself to the role that you're applying for. So I think I would definitely include it on your CV, but just make sure that it is relevant to what you're applying for. Like I said, you don't need something completely unrelated, because it won't benefit you at all in that way.
Okay, thank you for that. Amazing. So thanks, Helena, for your insight and guidance. It's been really useful. I hope that from this session, you'll all be able to produce a CV template that can be easily tailored. And if you would be interested in the vacancies that we are working on at the moment, please do visit signaturerecruitment.co.uk for opportunities available both in London and in Bristol. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a great afternoon enjoying the sunshine. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.